And welcome everyone to Sports Spectrum's weekly slant. We are so excited to bring to you a wonderful conversation today on football and faith. And we're so honored to really be the only show out there that I can find that intersects football and faith, that talks about football. There's a lot of football shows, and talks about Jesus. There's a lot of shows about Jesus, but not a lot of shows that have football and faith intermingled. And that's what we get to do here at Sports Spectrum's weekly slant. We've done 3 shows already. This is our 4th. You need to go back and watch the other 3 if you haven't watched them yet. Amazing conversations with people like Clyde Christensen, the quarterback coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. How about Pro Football Hall of Famer Jim Kelly? How about 3-time Super Bowl champion from the New England Patriots, Devin McCourty? And today we have another great conversation with Derwin Gray, Dr. Derwin Gray. He is the pastor of Transformation Church outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also a former NFL safety who played in the NFL from 1993 to 1998 with the Indianapolis Colts and the Carolina Panthers. And now he's gone on into ministry to become the pastor of a very successful church outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also the author of a bunch of books, and we're going to talk about his latest book during this conversation as well. Before we get to Derwin Gray, I want to tell you about Sports Spectrum's magazine and a deal that you can only find here on Sports Spectrum's weekly slant. We're talking about the magazine that's been around since 1985. Our latest issue is right over my left shoulder. You can see the cover with Dabo Sweeney, and it's the football edition. You can subscribe today, though, right now, for this magazine, which I think is a wonderful resource for you to give to someone and to share the gospel through the lens of faith, football, and sports with Sports Spectrum's magazine. But it's a great resource. You can sign up today and subscribe over at sportspectrum.com. You click the magazine icon at the top, and when you're there, put in the code SLANT20, SLANT20, and you get 20% off, and it's an exclusive deal only found right here at Sports Spectrum's weekly slant. Put that code in, SLANT20, go to sportspectrum.com and subscribe today. Now it's time for our conversation with Derwin Gray. Pastor Derwin Gray, longtime NFL safety. He's got some amazing stories. He brings them all right here, right now on Sports Spectrum's weekly slant. And we are joined today on our show by Pastor Dr. Derwin Gray, the former NFL safety and pastor of Transformation Church outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Derwin, welcome back to the show, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's always good to be with you, my friend. I enjoy following you, particularly this time of year, because it's the best time of year, which is football season. And so I enjoy watching you enjoy the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a fan, we'll just say, but I'm also a fan of football in general. I'm a fan of this show, which is called The Weekly Slant, and a show that we can have conversations on football and faith. I haven't been able to find another show out there, so I got excited when we were able to put this show together, and I was really excited when I saw that you have a new book out, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. It's called God, Do You Hear Me? It's out October 5th, 2021. I'm really excited for people to hear about this new book. And it's just exciting for me to have you on the show when I saw that this book was coming out. But we're going to talk a little more football maybe than we've done in our past shows here when we've had you on our Sports Spectrum podcast. And the first thing I was thinking about as a former player, and you're a pastor, so Sunday mornings are obviously a big deal. But when you're done preaching your sermon, do you go home and sit on the couch and just relax by watching football? Like, are you a guy that's watching the games, or are you kind of, sort of separated from that?
No, I love the game of football. So on a Sunday after I preach, my wife loves football as well. And so we go home and we'll watch the Carolina Panthers, or we'll watch other games as well. And so the game of football has been incredibly good to me. Not only personally, but that's how the Lord led me to faith, was through a teammate of mine with the Colts. Yeah. But the game of football itself is such a beautiful picture of life and how to succeed in life. Football is the ultimate team sport. And so when I watch football games, I don't really get into who wins or who loses. What I like to do is I look at what are the coaches doing, because there's a chess match, the offensive coordinator, the special teams coach, the defensive coordinator. And so I love personnel. I love formations, and I like to guess the plays before they happen. Like, people are infatuated by Tony Romo because he calls the plays.
Right.
But when you sit with any NFL player and you watch games with them, they can call the plays based on personnel packages, situations. And so I really enjoy that aspect of the game. And I also love to watch how hard the guys are playing.
Mm.
Like, even at the professional level, there's another gear of effort. So I think of guys like Brian Dawkins, right? He wasn't the biggest guy or the best athlete, but the way he played the game with passion. You look at what Tom Brady's doing at 44 years old. I don't even have a category for how he can continue. You look at Aaron Donald, who is a 6 foot, 280-pound defensive tackle that is the best defensive player in the game. And so I really enjoy those nuances of the game.
Do you think you would have gone into coaching if pastoring and preaching wasn't your calling? Because it sounds like you're a student of the game a little bit here.
Yeah, I actually thought I was going to coach. And one of my NFL coaches, the way I would ask him questions, he goes, "You ask questions like a coach," because I always asked, well, why? Because once you understand the why. And so actually in the late 90s, Coach Lavelle Edwards, when he was still at BYU, asked me if I wanted to come and coach the secondary. And at that time, I wasn't for sure if I was going to continue to play in the NFL or not. But I feel like I'm coaching now, that as a pastor, God is the owner of the team, right? And he's called me to be a head coach, and my staff is the coaches, and the congregation is the team. And it's like as a player coach, and so I view teaching the gospel and forming a people as coaching. But certainly I have coached in high school when my son played, and I really enjoyed. But to be a great coach, you have to be all in. Coaching is an art and it's a science. And so I just dabbled a little.
We had Jim Kelly on this show a few weeks ago, someone I know you played against when you were playing. And he said he would have played 3 or 4 more years if he was playing in today's game, where it protects the quarterback and it's more of a passing era. How do you think you would have fared in today's NFL as a defensive back?
Yeah, well, first of all, I played against Jim Kelly 93, 94, and the 93 team, which was a Super Bowl team. They were utterly phenomenal. A lot of these young kids are like, oh, no huddle offense and tempo. Well, Ted Marchibroda, when he was offensive coordinator at the Buffalo Bills, then he became the head coach with the Colts, actually developed the K-gun offense, which was no huddle. So we're talking in the 90s that this was going on. And so this stuff isn't new, right? But Kelly was phenomenal with Andre Reed and Thurman Thomas and Law. I mean, they were just phenomenal. And in 96, I actually knocked Kelly out for a few plays. I came in on a blitz and I smashed him good. I wasn't trying to knock him out, but they had to give him smelling salts to wake him up. That was for all the thousands of yards that he passed on us Colts. Now, back to what you're saying. There is no doubt that guys' careers can be extended longer now because the nature of the game has just changed. When I watch some of these hits, I'm going, back in the day, that was legal. Back in the day, the quarterback had to throw the ball in such a way his receivers wouldn't get destroyed. Now they're tempting the defense because they know as a defensive player, if you hit them, that's a penalty. Also, when you look at the protections for quarterbacks, it has changed into a passing league. It is extending guys' careers, which I'm for, particularly not using the crown of your helmet. But the game certainly will allow you to play longer if possible. But I look at some of the stuff from the 70s. I mean, the Raiders used to clothesline line receivers. Like, you'd get arrested for what the Raiders used to do. And I imagine October 8th, 1995. I came in on a blitz against the Miami Dolphins, and I just body slammed Marino. He had to get blood drained out of his hip. Cartilage was torn out of his knee. I got a penalty, but I didn't get fined, so it meant it was a legal hit. But in today's game, I might be out of the league forever.
Right.
So guys have got to learn how to tackle differently now.
So we were talking Jim Kelly. We're talking Dan Marino. You played against some pretty big time names. I also know that you had your only career interception off of another future Hall of Famer. I want to share some stories here. Can you tell me that story first of all? That one interception that you had.
Yeah. So Steve Young is an alumni of BYU, just like me.
That's right.
And so when I was there in school in the off seasons, he would come back, and all of us were in awe of Steve Young. He'd play basketball with us. He'd work out with us. He actually autographed like a card that I still have to this very day. I admired him. And then lo and behold, my third year in the league, I'm a team captain for special teams. I'm contributing in nickel and dime. And man, through a deflection, I pick off Steve Young. I run it for 10 yards. Jesse Sapulo, an incredible guard, just eats me, engulfs me, right? I'm just happy I picked off the ball. And so that following off season, I seen Steve at BYU. We were there at the same time training. And I was like, hey, Steve, will you autograph the ball that I intercepted off of you? And he looked at me and goes, ha, ha, ha. And he's never talked to me since that point.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's incredible. That's an incredible story.
We ended up winning that game against the 49ers. They were defending Super Bowl champs. And so we ended up winning that game. And so my one career interception, I dropped multiple, but that one I got, and it was off a Hall of Famer. So I had some pretty good games against some Hall of Fame guys that I grew up watching and then playing against. But of course, I mean, all those guys were it was an honor for me to be on a field with them. They were guys who changed the face of the NFL. Like Steve Young is the ultimate dual threat quarterback. Yes. Can you imagine him running the zone read? Oh. And with the rules, I mean, he'd throw for 4,000 and run for 2,000 probably.
Yeah. And you don't see left-handed quarterbacks anymore either. And I think that was an advantage for him when he played, that he was a lefty, because you're so used to seeing a ball coming out of a right-hander. I know it's still football, but I think he had a little bit of an advantage being a left-handed quarterback.
Well, and he also had an advantage of playing under Lavelle Edwards. So Lavelle Edwards was running the West Coast passing scheme in the 70s and 80s. And then Steve Young goes to the 49ers, and he's learning from the Mike Holmgrens, who's also a BYU guy. He's learning behind Joe Montana. He's learning under the great Bill Walsh. And so you take all of that plus desire and passion. He was very competitive against Joe Montana. And what you get is a Hall of Fame quarterback. Like Steve Young in today's era would he would destroy the league. I mean, the guy was a 4.4, 4.5. He was a pinpoint accurate passer, very competitive. I mean, he has a law degree, so he's brilliant. Yeah. So yeah, he's Steve Young was special. He's one of the greats, like all those guys.
That 1995 season was a really great season for you because you made it all the way to the AFC Championship game. People forget that the Colts that year kind of were the upstart team, and you actually had a really good shot at beating the Steelers, who would then go on to lose to my Cowboys. The last time Dallas has won a Super Bowl, it's been a long time, but that year was almost the Colts and Dallas in the Super Bowl. What do you remember about that game? Obviously, the outcome isn't what you hope, but that's still a pretty awesome accomplishment to be able to play in an AFC Championship game.
Yeah, you know what? We got on a roll at the right time. Like, that team was built for January. Tony Siragusa, Tony McCoy, Jeff Herrod, Quentin Coriat, Tony Bennett. Our front seven could stop the run. And we went into we beat the Chiefs, right? We smacked the Chiefs. They were 13-3. No disrespect to Steve Bono, but we said, look, we're going to put 8 men in a box and make him beat us throwing the ball. And it was 13 below, so that wasn't going to happen. Right. So what I remember about the Steelers game, number one for me personally, so here I'm a little kid, and I'm walking with the other team captains to the middle of the field. You got Rod Woodson, Cornell Lake, like all these and here's little old me, right? And I'm thinking as a little kid growing up in Texas, man, the Pittsburgh Steelers tortured me because I was a diehard Cowboys fan. I stopped being a Cowboys fan in 1993 when I had to play against them. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to ask Troy Aikman for his autograph because he's about to throw a touchdown on me. So I'm not a fan anymore. But
Yeah.
being in the middle of the field as a team captain in that stadium was epic. Bill
Three
Cowher on the other
Rivers.
side,
Yeah.
right? And man, we kicked their butts for 58 minutes. We were more physical. We controlled the ball, but here's the problem though. We were kicking field goals and scoring touchdowns. And we were driving the ball late. Jim Harbaugh hands the ball off to Lamont Warren. There's a gaping hole there, and Willie Williams, a little corner for Pittsburgh, comes off the end, and he dives and he hits Lamont Warren's back leg, and Lamont Warren falls down and doesn't get the first down. He would still be running today. The hole was so big.
Yeah.
So we have to punt the ball. Pittsburgh's driving down. Neil O'Donnell literally throws the ball to Quentin Coriat, who is a great player. It hits him in the hands. All he has to do is catch it and we win. Super Bowl. He drops it. And then on like a 4th and 2, they hit Ernie Mills, I believe, on an out and up. Got down to the 2-yard line. Bam Morris scores. We get the ball. Jim Harbaugh was incredible that year. He was captain comeback, and Jim led us incredibly. And then we threw a Hail Mary, and it looked like Aaron Bailey actually caught the ball, but he didn't. And the last thing I remember from that game is I had never cried so hard after a game because it just meant that much. It wasn't about money, though the money was great. It was like my chance to do what my heroes had done. Like I was literally seconds away from that game. Like that's the pinnacle of our sport. And I just remember just weeping. And Ted Marcher Broda, who's passed away, he was a good man. And he looked at me, he started crying, and we'll all be back the next year. And you know what happened? Next year never came.
Yeah.
We had injuries and lost in the first round of playoffs, and we were never the same.
Yeah, it's so funny, the stories, the moments. That's why you see an accomplishment like Jim Kelly going to 4 straight Super Bowls and not winning it, but just the difficulty of even getting to a Super Bowl and how hard it is, and to go to 4 in a row, and obviously not winning it stinks, but like just going to 4 in a row is so difficult. It's so hard just to even get to a Super Bowl. When I hear you tell that story, I can sense there's still a bit of,
oh man,
man.
it brought up some feelings, man. And I have a little bit different perspective about those Buffalo Bills teams. We live in a sum zero society. Well, if you don't win, you're second loser, right? That's what everybody says. And I know the pain, right? And I know what those guys went through. But let me tell you something. Those were some incredible trend-setting teams. Let me just start here. Bruce Smith.
Yeah.
Every Colts defensive player would not sit down. We stood up to watch Bruce Smith. That's how great Bruce Smith was, is we would watch him play. Bruce Smith played in a 34 defense, which meant he was rarely ever the outside guy. He used to have a linebacker outside of him, so he would have to navigate in a much harder way than a traditional defensive end.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, Steve Tasker. People forget about him. Special teams guru. He made me raise my game, and one of the greatest compliments I ever got was when we played them in 95, right before the game. We shook hands as captains, and he goes, "You deserve to go to the Pro Bowl this year, not me. You're having a great year."
Wow.
And of course, Jim Kelly was just a linebacker playing quarterback. Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, Pete Metzelaars. I mean, they were just, the list goes on. Those teams were phenomenal, and they just happened to have some really bad breaks in the biggest games. but they were brilliant. And they are, in my opinion, the grandfathers of all this spread zone stuff that you see now.
Yeah.
The no huddle, the tempo, like they perfected it.
Yeah, they were amazing and incredible. I want to talk about, and you referenced this in your new book. The new book is called God, Do You Hear Me? I'm going to ask you about it in a second. Training camp,
Yeah.
2 years later, August
Yeah.
2nd, 1997, because at this point, all of these stories you shared are sort of a BC, right? Before Christ for Derwin
Mhm.
Gray. And then August 2nd, 1997 takes place. You write about it in your book. I would
Yeah.
love for you to share that story because you're what, in your fifth season at that point? You're
Yeah.
26 years old and you
Yeah.
got the world, at your fingertips, right?
Yeah.
Playing in the NFL. And then something big time happens that really starts the trajectory of your career in a completely different way.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, coming from where I came from, Jason, I was a survivor. I had to scrap. I had to scratch everything that I got. I had to fight for.
Yeah.
And so, not growing up in church, not knowing who Jesus was, your heart's going to worship something. Everybody's religious, even atheists, whether if it's knowledge or science or philosophy. The human heart has to find affections for something, and football was it for me. And so every detail I loved. I loved the study, and I loved the practice, and I loved the work hard. I loved the physicality. I loved imposing my will on another person. And even when somebody would jack me up, it was like, okay, I'm coming back, right? Except for Barry Sanders. I wanted to get away from him as fast as possible.
I can
But
understand.
basically, high school, college, and my first 5 years in the NFL, it was like, okay, I've done what I'm supposed to do. Like, it's a sad thing to peak at 26 years of age.
Mm.
And so I had a teammate named Steve Grant. His nickname was the Naked Preacher. And for 5 years after practice, he would just share about Jesus. And I'm like, who is this guy? They're like, that's the Naked Preacher. And I'm like, bro, do you realize you're half naked? But that's what he did is he would share Christ with a white towel wrapped around his waist in his Bible. And over a 5 year process, just listening to him, seeing Christ, hearing about the gospel. On August 2nd, 1997, it was my 5th year in NFL. And we're in training camp, and it's right after lunch. Anderson University in Anderson, in Indiana. I go to my dorm room, and as I'm on my way, I just feel this incredible chasm of emptiness in my heart. And I call my wife on the phone and I say, I want to be more committed to you, and I want to be committed to Jesus. And literally, that's when I was born again. Like, I literally felt the bodily action. I felt the divine love of God just wrap around me like a warm winter coat on a cold day. Like, I knew I was forgiven. I knew it was different.
Yeah.
Like, I met the grace of God, and I haven't been the same since.
I love that story. And it's interesting that we're talking this week because the Panthers and Cowboys play on Sunday in
Yeah.
Dallas. And
Yes.
there's a personal connection to that game and a game being played in Dallas between the Panthers and the Cowboys for you because it was 1998 and you had since moved on from Indianapolis to Carolina. And that's the last game you ever played in the
It is.
NFL between Carolina and
Yeah.
Dallas. It
Yeah.
set you on a trajectory towards God's calling on your life. Can you kind of
Yeah.
share what took place and then why you knew at that
Yeah.
moment that it's time to do something else?
Yeah. It was strange. So I played 5 years with the Colts. Bill Polian came in as the new Colts general manager, and I was like, okay, he loves special teams guys. He's watched me just rip up the Bills for years. Surely he's going to want to resign me. He got there and was like, nope, see ya,
Yeah.
bye-bye. And so the Panthers signed me as a free agent and came in, worked hard, and we're playing the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm running downfield on a kickoff. My family's in the stands, and I engage a blocker. I go one way, he goes the other way, and my knee didn't agree with it. And I felt my MCL snap, and I
Mm.
felt bones on the outside part of my leg break. Even now, as I was walking to do this interview with you. I could tell it's about to get cold because right where I broke it, I can feel it. It's like, hello, it's about to get cold. And I'm laying there in the middle of Texas Stadium, the old school Texas stadium, on the field that I grew up wanting to play in. It'd be my last game. And I distinctly being mad, going, God, you know what? I'm not going to pray for a whole day. I'm mad.
Mm.
And, it's one of these things where God's like, well, I didn't cause it, son. You live in a broken world, but I'm going to take what you view as a setback to give you a set up. And so literally I couldn't play the rest of the season. So guess what I did? Rehab my knee and read the Bible all day for hours at a time. I was so fascinated. And so I made the most money. It was 500 grand that year at any time in my career for playing 3 games. So basically the Panthers paid me to read the Bible and rehab my knee. And then after that game and going into the next year, both my wife and I sensed, we're done. I don't want to play anymore. And my agent said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. And the next thing we know, people start calling me to go places and speak. So yeah, what looked like a setback was actually a setup.
You're so young too. You're 27 years old at
Yeah.
that point, and all of a sudden football, everything that you've worked for is done. Were you okay with that? Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, because you
Yeah.
work so hard for so many years. There's so many players, and you know this. You know a lot of guys that struggle with identity issues and that post-playing career, but you were okay with it.
I was okay with it, and here's why. Because football was such a performance-based sport, in which it should be. It was the first time that there was someone who loved me, not because of a 40 time, not because how strong I was or how good my technique was. It was the first time that someone looked at my game film and said, yeah, you're not very good, but I am. And I love you anyway, but I love you enough not to leave you the same. And so grace just overwhelmed me that it was like, man, I found a pearl of great price. I'm selling everything for this plot of land. It was an easy choice. It was not a struggle at all to retire in light of how great Jesus was. And I think God used injuries to wean me off of the pacifier of football.
Pacifier of football. Why do you call it that?
Well, because for me, it was always my safe place. When things were chaotic at home in high school, football was my temple. When I went to college, football was my temple. When I went to the pros, then the temple got a little difficult. And then that's where I needed to come to know Jesus, because everything that I thought football was going to be, it was not. The broken pieces of my soul, football couldn't fix. But God used football as a means of grace to point me to Jesus. He uses everything. Like, he doesn't waste anything.
Yeah.
Everything is spiritual.
I love that. You have this book. So you're not just a pastor now, you're also an author. You've written a bunch of books. All have been great. You wrote 2 this year, by the way, which you're kind of entering John Gordon territory here. As I joke with John Gordon, who's written like 25 books, and he writes like 2 a year as well. And I'm like, I don't know how you guys do this, writing 2 books a year, but you have this new one. It's called God, Do You Hear Me? And I'm loving this book because it's about discovering the prayer God always answers. And I'm curious for you, it's out October 5th. Why this book? Why prayer, and why write this book right now?
Yeah. If I was really smart and understood marketing and strategy, I would have said, you know what? In 2021, there's going to still be a global pandemic. There's going to be political divisiveness, and the world's going to be a mess. So we need to know how to pray. I'm not that smart, but God is. So this book is actually birthed out of my own experience with prayer. Prayer is like a friend that you like, but you get mad at. You need the friend, but you don't quite understand them. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus's disciples in Luke 11 asked a question that God always answers with a yes. Jesus's disciples said, Jesus, we see you praying in a certain place. Will you teach us to pray? And a lot of what we do that we think is praying is actually not praying. What we're actually doing is trying to manipulate God to do what we want him to do for us.
Hmm.
Prayer is actually God inviting us into his story so that we can fulfill his will. And that's how we're transformed. So prayer is more than just getting. Prayer is becoming. And so the Lord's Prayer is actually a framework that really opens our eyes to who Jesus is and to who we can become. And God always answers this prayer because the Lord's Prayer is God's will for our lives.
Why was this so hard for you early on? And why has it been so hard for so many others to spend time in prayer? I mean, and it's
Yeah.
also something that I think it's our first defense, it should be, but it seems to be our last resort for so many people. I mean, we have prayer every Wednesday night at our church, and it is not attended that well.
Yeah.
But we're going to keep having it because we believe in the power of prayer. And the few
Mhm.
that do come, man, we get into that time together with God, and we just talk and we just pray and we just reach out and just glorify His name. But it's a hard thing for a lot of people. Why is that?
Uh, the short answer is as Americans, we have too much to depend on God.
Yeah. Yep.
Even as poor Americans, like I would say I grew up poor until I went to Calcutta, India. And I'm like, man, no, I didn't. This is real poverty. And so I think what makes prayer difficult is we think we're stronger than we are and we depend on too much. And so therefore we only go to God when it's like a situation of crisis, right? And so what I try to do in the book is to show us that God actually wants to be with you. That's why it starts with our Father. Like we have a Father who really wants to be with us. So prayer is not just getting stuff, prayer is getting God. The object of prayer is God Himself. I mean, just think of it. You go to Thanksgiving dinner, grandparents are at the head of the table, there's food everywhere, cousins and brothers and sisters, and everybody's there. It's like pass the gravy and pass the cranberry sauce, and everybody's eating. When is the apple pie? And then you get up, you burp, and then you walk out, and then you tell your grandparents, "Hey, what are we having for Christmas?"
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that's what we do is we go to God's table and we ask for the gravy, we ask for the cranberry sauce, we ask for the turkey, but we don't ask for Him.
Hmm.
And the Lord's Prayer, that's why it starts with our Father, because our Father through Christ by the Spirit is the object of God's prayer. God doesn't want to be used, He wants to be worshiped. And in Matthew 6 8 and Matthew 6 32, twice the Holy Spirit leads Matthew to say this: God already knows what you need. So why do we spend so much time asking God for what we need? And God is going, no, 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 no. What you need most is me. Prayer is a posture of our hearts always being attuned to the divine presence of God.
That's good stuff there. The book is called God, Do You Hear Me? October 5th. It is out. Y'all need to go check it out everywhere books are found. Derwin, thanks for being on the show, my friend. I really appreciate it. All the best to you.
Always. Thank you.
And many thanks to Derwin Gray for being here today on Sports Spectrum. He was fantastic. He's got such a great story. And the fact that he is a former NFL player who played in what I want to call the heyday of the NFL in the 1990s against some amazing players and with some amazing players. This guy then goes on to become a pastor and impact lives for the kingdom between his sermons, between his encouragement and his teachings, and of course, the books that he's written. How great is Derwin Gray? So we're just glad that Derwin spent the time that he did sharing his story here on Sports Spectrum's weekly Slant, the only faith and football show around. And Derwin fits that to a T, right? Faith and football, talking about a former football player who is now a pastor. Derwin Gray, what a great guy. And we just appreciate him for being here today on Sports Spectrum's weekly Slant. And before we say goodbye, we want you to go check out our website again, sportspectrum.com, for all of our content. But then click that magazine icon at the top and you get 20% off a Sports Spectrum 1 year or 2 year subscription when you put in the code SLANT20. Use that code SLANT20. It's exclusive for this show. You can't get this anywhere else, but you can tell someone about it maybe and get the discount. But it's Slant 20. Go subscribe today, a 1-year or 2-year subscription to Sports Spectrum's magazine. You can go do it now. It makes a great gift. It's a great magazine for yourself. It can be a great resource to share the gospel. Subscribe today at sportspectrum.com and put that code in there, SLANT20. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time right here on Sports Spectrum's weekly Slant. We got Brock Heward next week hosting. Lots of great stuff. Can't wait to see who's going to be on the show, and can't wait to see you again next time right here on Sports Spectrum's weekly Slant.